Welcome to the Property Podcast, the home of news and debate about building long-term wealth from property investment for beginners and experts alike. And now for your hosts. I keep asking if I can say real estate, but they tell me that's not how you guys do it over there. It's Rob and Rob.
Welcome everybody to the Property Podcast, episode 17, the live edition. Can everyone give us a scream? Now, there's a reason that you can't hear anybody because it's only our audio, Rob. But welcome to everybody who's joined us this evening. It's fantastic to have you. We've got loads of questions lined up. We're looking forward to more questions firing across to us as well. Rob, how are you this evening?
Sweatier than usual, but yeah, not holding up pretty well. Maybe we can get our editor Chris to drop some cheering sound effects in during if we need to make it sound more impressive in the edit.
Yeah, it can sound like a cheesy American sitcom with the fake clapping and cheering in the background. Right, Rob, we normally will do our reviews, but we're going to have a pardon this week just because it's a live episode. So we will carry on as normal, but please continue to send your reviews through. But as we're missing out, Rob, what have we got coming up?
Coming up, we have got nothing but listener questions. Really excited about this. We invited everyone to ask a question at the point of registering. We had absolutely loads, so we're going to get through all of those. We're going to bash through them pretty quickly, but giving you enough detail, hopefully. And for the people who are live on this call, then you can go ahead and ask your questions live, and hopefully we'll try and get around to as many of those as possible as well. We don't have any news this week. We do have a resource at the end, if you stick around to the end. But other than that, we're just going to get straight into the questions because there are absolutely loads of them.
And the first one, we say thank you to Sophie Cooper. And she asks, what do you think is the best way to get started in property investor for a total beginner? So if you're new to property investment, what's the best way to start? And what a great question to open this up. I'll chip in first, Rob. The first thing you need to do is clearly educate yourself. So before you go and withdraw all the money from the bank and go off and buy somewhere, you're probably best to educate yourself on the whole process and what's going to happen. That's the property market in general. That's mortgages, that's strategies, what are you going to do longer term, your goals, your plans. There's so many different things you need to research and start to educate yourself on. And there's lots of ways, fortunately, you can do that for little or no money at all. So clearly there's podcasts. You've got the Property Geek, you've got Property News Radio, which is coming soon. And of course, the one and only, the Property Podcast. You've got books, many of them. You've got blogs. Rob's got a blog, I've got a blog, and there are plenty of the good blogs out there. You've got resources like Property 118 and Property Tribes, great forums. The list goes on. So first of all, you want to educate yourself. And there's lots of areas you need to educate yourself, but the more you know, the easier it will be for you to invest and the more confidence you'll have.
As you're doing your learning, there are lots of decisions that you can make along the way. So if you're going to make your very first investment, there are lots of choices to make, and a lot of them we've actually covered in the podcast already in previous episodes. The first choice to make is, do you go for buy to let or buy to sell? If I were a first timer, I'd be going down the buy to let route because it's less risky and you'll learn to experience the joy of making a profit every month. But, you might have a different strategy. You need to decide where to invest. You need to pick an area, decide whether to do that near where you live or further away. Got to think about the type of tenant you want to attract. Think about another topic we've covered, which is the fundamentals for long-term demand. So that's transport, a good mix of local employers, shops, education, all that kind of thing. And that's before you even start getting into the actual details of individual properties, where you can use Rightmove to establish what the market prices are, figure out what numbers matter to you, which we're going to come on to later. And there's just absolutely tons of research as you go along. If you're looking at getting started, I think the key message is not to get overwhelmed by all this research and all these options and just not overthink it too much. You're not going to do the deal of a lifetime your very first time. You're just not. And it doesn't matter because you're going to get used to the process. You're going to make some mistakes or do some things that aren't optimal, but they'll sort themselves out over time. And you're going to do better the next time you invest. So really, the best way to get started is to just get started.
That's it. Take action. I know it sounded like there was about 101 things you need to do before you take action, but actually it's not that hard. If you said to yourself, okay, I'm at point zero and I want to be moving my tenants in 3 months' time. Although that's a stretch, I'm sure you could do that. It's possible. You don't have to do it in 3 months. It's up to you. But the main thing is, once you've started implementing all that education and looking at your options, take action. Don't mess around. Don't just sit on the information you have. Move forward. Okay, Rob, who have we got next?
Next, we've got Pieter, I think. No, that sounds Irish again. Pieter, I'm not sure. It's a very nice man who asked a question, and I'm really sorry for mangling your name.
It's funny how I gave you that one, Rob.
Funny how these things work out. This nice gentleman asks, how do you buy in order to get your deposit back out again to reinvest? So if you're putting your money into a property, how can you get that money back out to use for another deal? And this is a big topic, obviously, because there were the days when property values were going up so fast that you could just wait a bit and you'll end up with all this equity that you can withdraw and buy the next one. In a market that's flatter than it was, you're going to need to actually do something to earn getting your cash back out. There are two ways of doing it, essentially. You can either buy a property below market value, and I'm sure Rob can talk a bit more about that because that's a large part of what he does for his clients. And then there's forcing the appreciation. So that means doing something to add value to the property in terms of a refurb or an extension or something like that. Before I pass over to Rob, I'll just give a few numbers as an example because it's not the most straightforward concept to grasp necessarily if you're completely new to this. So the essence of it is, if you buy a property for, say, £100,000, you're going to need a deposit of maybe 25%. So let's say a £25,000 deposit. If you spend £10,000 on refurbing, so that could be a new kitchen and bathroom, it could be an extension, it could be many other things, then 6 months later, maybe you've added some value with your refurb and you can remortgage based on a new market value of £150,000. If you do that, then if you keep the same loan to value, which is 75%, then you'll be able to borrow £112,500, which basically means you can pay back the money you borrowed in the first place and pull out the £35,000 of your own that you put in, which was the deposit and the refurb funds. And so now you own this property, you've still got 25% equity in there, and you've taken all your money out, ready to do it again. We'll put those numbers in the show notes because it's much easier to see it when it's written down than it is when it's being read out loud. But essentially, that's the gist of it. There are complications because you need to be able to prove that you've added this value, and you should really be using a bridging finance lender or a specialist mortgage product. But that is the gist of it.
Remember, the show notes will be available in a couple of weeks' time when this episode's broadcast at thepropertypodcast.com/17. But to add to that, Rob mentioned below market value. A word of warning. Below market value is not an asking price. So let me explain what I mean. Some people say they've got deals that are available that are below market value, and they're not really. Some may say, well, the asking price on this property is £100,000 and you can get it for £75,000. Now, the problem is they use the term asking price. An asking price is just one person's opinion, and that person may be duly unqualified to give a valuation. You know, they might have been drunk when they picked up 100,000. Let me give you an example. If I had a biro, I could say to you, Rob, you can buy this biro off me. It's worth £100, but I'll give it to you for 20. Now, it may sound like I'm giving you the deal of the century, but actually the pen was only worth 50 pence. So just because I said the asking price was 100 doesn't mean it's a good deal. The way to get around it, what we do at R&P Property is we'll send a surveyor out, establish the value. So we'll get a surveyor's RICS report and we'll then negotiate down from there. So we've had a professional tell us what the value is, and then we work backwards from there when we do our negotiations. That's the only way you can establish whether you've got below market value or not. An asking price might be right, but it might be way out, so you can't rely on it. So it's just something to be aware of, you know, especially when you see a lot of this marketing material out there. Not saying they're being evil, but they're certainly not showing you the full picture. Next question. Richard Trow asks, is there an optimal portfolio size? So then he goes on to say that balances income, time management, risk, and achievability. There is an optimum portfolio size for you, Richard, and for every single one of our listeners. But what is right for you will be different for the next person. Let me explain. If someone's 30 and someone's 60, their goals and aspirations and timeframes and strategies will be completely different. Their optimal portfolio size and your optimal portfolio size will be very different. So I can't answer today and go, yes, it's 6. That's how many. Because 6 properties might be perfect for some of our listeners, but for the other 95%, it might not be. So how to find your optimum portfolio size is to establish a goal, a time frame for that goal, and then put a strategy together, and that will tell you the portfolio size. But actually, I'd actually pick holes a little bit in the terms you've used, and I'm sorry, Richard, but what I actually should point out is it's not the size of the portfolio that matters, it's the value. So you could have 10 properties that are worth £50,000 or 4 properties in London that are worth £250,000. I'd rather have the 4. So it's not that more is better. So, people often refer to how many properties they should own, but really it's what should be the value of their portfolio. So it's something to be aware of. Can you add to that, Rob?
I'd say that, again, before the crunch, when all the madness was in full swing, there was very much an idea among certain investors. They kind of got a number of properties in their head. Some of them got a number in their head as well, like, I want £1 million of property. I've literally spoken to people who said, I wanted 100 properties. That's the number I wanted. And that wasn't based on anything other than it being a nice round number. It didn't really answer any questions about what it would mean for them in terms of their goals. They just wanted 100. But let's just zoom in on the risk element for a minute. Like, if you did have 100 properties, say, then depending on how you feel about risk, there are pros and cons to that. Because if you've got 100 properties and one tenant stops paying, then that's only affected 1% of your rental income. If you've got 2 properties, that's halved it. So in that case, it's risky to have fewer. But then you could say, if you've got 100 properties, that's 100 boilers that can blow up. In that way, it's more risky. So really, it just on every level, it comes down to your own personal preferences and your goals. The next question is from Andrew Egerton, and he asks, if you had £50,000 and wanted to get into property investment, what would each of you do if you were in my position? Kind of echoing the previous question, the answer to this one is we don't know your position, really. It very much depends on your goals again. It's like, what income do you want to make from property? What kind of timescale are you investing over? Just to give you a few contrasting examples, if you had 50,000, you could buy 2 houses for £100,000 each in, somewhere like Peterborough or something like that. Reinvest your rental profits every month, wait for inflation to erode your debt, wait for property prices to go up, then use the money you've saved and the equity to buy more. But then that might be totally unsuitable for you. You might be in a mad rush to get your income up as high as you possibly can, in which case you might be doing what we were talking about earlier and investing in such a way that you can pull that £50,000 back out again to use on the next deal. If you did do that, you'd need to have a plan B, of course, because for your first investment, you might not get it exactly right. If it were me, I might want to buy 3 houses in Liverpool and do student lets for cash flow, because cash flow is what I'm focusing on right now. But that's just me and it's not you. And so it's working out exactly what your position is, not just financially, but in terms of everything else that goes along with it.
There's not much more I can add to that, Rob. The simple answer is it depends on your situation. Are you employed, unemployed? You're in a position to get a mortgage, your age? There's so many variables that it's hard to answer. Andrew, you probably would have wanted an answer to your specific circumstances, but if you want to get in touch with either of us, we will happily run through that with you. But I think I recognise your name anyway, and I think we've spoken over the phone, so maybe we are talking about that. Okay, next, Calvin. Calvin says he's 22 years old, he's in his first job and wants to get into property full-time. What should I do in the meantime to transition? And should I work in the industry, for example, as an estate agent? Well, that depends. I did. So I started in property investment about 8 years ago, and then a year later I became an investor. So I've been investing for about 7 years. That's me, and that worked out well for me. However, I had an investor who, she didn't work and she was happy to do some part-time work and wanted to get a bit more involved in property. So I suggested to her that she goes to work at a letting agent. And this was about 3 or 4 months ago. And she hates it. She absolutely hates it. She doesn't enjoy it whatsoever. So it's not for everyone. The other thing, Calvin, if you're a trained doctor, then I certainly wouldn't go and work in estate agents. That's not the only place you can gain experience, is it, Rob?
I personally wouldn't want to work as an estate agent, but that's just me. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but there are other alternatives. So if you wanted to get into the industry another way, you could consider training as a mortgage broker or a surveyor. Either of those things would give you a really good overview of the market as well, and kind of give you a bird's eye view on what other investors are doing, what's working, what's happening within property. And that's another way of learning. So yeah, if you really want to work in property, don't just stop at the high street. Think about all the different people who are involved and all the different ways you could do that. But without actually working in property, then you can still be doing all all the things we talked about earlier. You can still be reading, learning, networking, and saving, of course, to get the deposits you need. That's all stuff that you can be doing after 5 o'clock and at the weekends if you decide not to go down the working in property route. Next question is from Antonio. And Antonio asks, how do you find good deals? Does the American flipper house concept exist in the UK market? I think my answer to that would be, yep, flips do work. Actually, I'm speaking to someone next week for my other podcast, the Property Geek podcast, who has done a few really successful flips while working full time, which is why I really wanted to speak to him, because he's actually just in the last month become a full-time investor. But before that, he was doing flips while working. So I really wanted to get his take on that. So that might be worth a listen for you to find out the details of exactly how he did it. In the UK, I suppose it's not really any different from the States, except you need the market to actually be active. If you're going to be flipping, then normally you've got a time scale in mind, like you've got finance, often bridging finance, which is quite expensive. So you want to sell in a certain amount of time. So that means you need to be in a market where there are actually people who can buy that house that you've bought and you've done up. There's lots of different ways of doing it. For the most part, it comes down to adding value. And there's also Paul Ribbons' strategy, who I've spoken to in the past, which is where you'll buy something and then put it straight back into auction. If you know what you're doing, it can work. As for finding good deals, I'll let Robert take that one because there's 1,000,001 different ways. But I suppose to sum up, the way of getting a good deal is to either be in a position to buy where no one else can and get someone out of a tough spot, or by knowing stuff that no one else does. If you can see the potential in a property when everyone else has missed it, that can be a good deal. Over to you, Rob.
Hopefully I've got an idea of getting good deals, otherwise the business isn't going to last long. Yeah, there's plenty of ways. Okay, so you don't always have to go to a company like RMP Property to get deals. There are other ways of doing it, and these are some of the options. So you can network, you can speak with people at local networking groups, find out what they're up to, where they're getting their deals from. You can also network with local letting and estate agents, let them know you're serious, prove it to them if you can, because they'll have a lot of people who walk into their office every day and tell them they're investors and will never have any intention of doing so. So somehow prove to them you're serious. You can also negotiate direct with some of the new builds. So the builders of these properties, particularly the FTSE listed companies, they at the year end will have told the stock market that they will achieve X amount of sales. Now, if they don't hit their targets or are close to hitting their targets, which is quite often, they'll then contact companies like RMP Property and others to say, listen, can you shift some of these units at a discount because we need to hit our targets? How you can take advantage of that is look at when it's year end for these property companies and go to them 60 days before and explain to them that you can move quickly and that you are prepared to do a deal. If the money's right, you'll be surprised. And the reason I know is because that's how I started in property investment. I used to work for a builder twice a year. They used to do silly deals and would pretty much take any offer just to get them out the door. Also, if it's a development site, if you're first on, you can get a deal. And if there's only a few units left, you can negotiate for deals as well. And then finally, of course, you can work with companies like RMP Property if you just want someone else to do the legwork and run around for you. I have somebody who sources for me full time. It's down to you as an individual how you approach it, but the good news is there's not just one way of doing it, there's plenty of them. Next, Barry asks, do you support buying life insurance on buy-to-let mortgages? Personally, no. I have life insurance. Does it cover all my buy-to-lets? No. Would it cover some of them? Yes. So when I mean cover, would it pay off all the mortgages? My life insurance is pretty hefty. It would cover quite a lot, but not enough for all the properties. It's the same with any insurance. It's personal preference. I don't personally take out landlord's insurance. It's not to say that it's not a good idea. Many people swear by it. The thing with insurance is it's your risk profile. Would you feel better? Would you sleep easier if you had some sort of insurance to protect you? If the answer is yes, go and get it. If it doesn't bother you, don't worry about it.
I will freely say that I know very, very little about insurance in general, life insurance in particular. I did see a presentation recently by someone who pointed out that if you're doing joint venture kind of deals, then life insurance becomes a little bit more important because otherwise you could leave a real old mess behind if the worst does happen. That's not something I really know anything about, but it's just something which was brought up recently. A lot of things you can self-insure, of course, by just kind of putting money aside. This isn't one of them. So yeah, it comes down very much to personal preference. The next question comes in from Mark Benson. And he says, I am a first-time buyer who will shortly be buying a property. At first, I plan on living in it, but longer term, I plan on renting it out and buying another. If I'm not buying this property with a buy-to-let mortgage, will that stop me from renting it out? So this is a pretty easy answer. If you're buying with a residential mortgage, then you can't rent it out unless you do one of two things. One of them is to speak to your lender and get consent to let. That's where you tell them that you want to rent it out, get their permission, and they will normally agree to that for a set length of time. They might charge you a higher rate of interest though. So they might say, okay, for the first 6 months you can do that, and then after that we'll charge you an extra 1.5%. Something like that. So that's getting consent to let. That's not really a long-term solution though. The other thing is just to remortgage onto a proper buy-to-let mortgage. That is not a difficult thing to do. It's just, of course, you need to make sure if that's your plan, you don't want to be tying yourself in. So if you get in on a 5-year fixed residential mortgage and in a couple of years' time you want to switch to a buy-to-let product, that could be tricky. So it's a good thing that you've got that plan now, because you can bear in mind not to fix for too long when you get your mortgage in the first place. It's not a restriction, it's not a big problem, but you do need to make sure you do the right thing by the lender, because you can't be renting out a property on a residential mortgage without permission, or doing the opposite, which is where you get a buy-to-let mortgage and live there. Either of those is a big no-no.
Okay, and who have you got next, Rob?
Next up is Sarah Geiger, and she asks, are there ways to reduce capital gains tax when selling a property? This one falls under the don't know category, basically. Much like insurance earlier, this isn't something that I know very much about at all. We can kind of give you the broad brushstrokes, but for any of these specialist things, it's always best to speak to an expert. When it comes to things like tax and insurance, I think it's very much an investment speaking to an expert rather than a cost. I do know that you get a certain allowance, and if you've got a partner, if you buy with a partner, you can split that allowance between you, so you might be able to creep in under the threshold. That is the limit of my knowledge, Rob. Do you know any more? Can you cast any light on this?
No, you're right, Rob. You do get an allowance that's there every year that you can use, and if you buy as a couple, so if both names on the property, then you can combine that allowance together. But you've nailed it. We always talk about use experts. We're very good at buy-to-let, strategies, goals, building a portfolio. That's what we do. We're going to have an episode on mortgages soon. We both know quite a lot about mortgages, but it's not our day-to-day. There are experts out there who know better than us. So we're going to be liaising with a mortgage broker to put that episode together, just so you get the best knowledge. I could go and source my own mortgages, because I've got a good idea what the best products are, but still, I pay a mortgage broker to do it for me because they know better than me. So the point I'm making is things like tax, mortgages, insurance, anything like that which is specialised, bring in an expert, utilise their knowledge, because they'll not only save you money, they should hopefully earn you money. So next, Lee says, how can I finance properties when I'm self-employed from May 2013 and I've lived in Australia for 12 years and he's a UK citizen? So I've kind of just semi-answered that before with saying about a mortgage broker and use experts. However, Lee, I do work with a lot of expats and a lot of people overseas, so I've got a fair idea. I'd need to know more about your particular circumstances to say, yes, you could get a mortgage, or no, you can't. What are the things we do at RMP Properties? We've worked with a commercial lender before, and they've looked at the group of properties that we've worked on and have therefore lent on a non-status basis. So you would have been able to, I'm sure, take an advantage of that. Also, if you're listening and you're an expat overseas, if you're investing and the mortgage is 100,000 or more, then you should be able to get a mortgage on it. There are a few options. When my investors come to me overseas or they're foreign nationals, what have you, I still put them in touch with an international mortgage lender specialist. If you actually want to get in touch, Lee, and you want me to introduce him to you, then absolutely, I can do that. See, it's interesting, Rob. I've got someone who does the UK stuff. I've got somebody who does remortgages, and I've got somebody who does the international stuff, and they're all experts in their individual fields. It really hits home the point that we've just made. Definitely
all about investing in expert opinions. I'm very glad you're here because you've definitely got more expertise than I have on that. I wouldn't have been able to answer that question at all. Moving on, our next question is from Richard Hodgson, and Richard asks, how do you define whether an investment project will be viable or not? So that's a pretty broad question. Investment projects can be many, many different things. If you're talking particularly about something where there's going to be a big development or a heavy refurb involved, then that's a specialist thing in itself. In fact, for that, there's an episode of the Property Geek podcast I did with Sue Elkington a few weeks ago, which I highly recommend listening to, because she really broke down a lot of the factors behind that. But then an investment project can be lots of different things to lots of different people. For the purposes of answering your question quickly now, let's break it down into buy-to-let and buy-to-sell. They're the two most common overall classes of property investment. And so establishing viability on the buy-to-let side, it's all about what makes it viable for you. So that's when you're looking at numbers like gross yield, net yield, return on investment, all that kind of thing. And you're going to have your own number that you use to judge whether it's going to work for you. I know someone who does it completely on the basis of net yield. I like to look at return on investment and imagine how quickly my money's coming back to me. Again, it comes back to goals. And so you're going to need to know what kind of numbers you need to be achieving and what numbers are important for you in order to get you closer to your goals with each investment. Rob, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, and then maybe you can talk about the buy to sell side of it as well.
It's a very broad question. There are lots of different types of projects and lots of ways to decide whether they're viable. But on buy to sell, then the first thing you need to do is make sure that the market is vibrant where you're looking, because you can get a great deal, but if nothing's selling, then you can't really execute your strategy. You then need to assess what the average market value for your particular property or project you're going for is, if you're doing buy to sell. And then you need to decide what's the maximum you'll go up to when you're finding a deal. So if the selling rate is 200, you may say, okay, well, after work, I'm only willing to go up to 175. So you might buy for 150 and you're willing to spend 25 on the refurb. You need to work the numbers. Generally, broadly speaking, to decide how any investment project is viable or not is numbers. You've got to research, find out what the market is doing in wherever you're looking, and get your pen, paper, calculator out and crunch numbers. That's the only way to see if an investment's viable or not. So I hope that answers your question, Richard. But again, as we said to everyone else, if you'd like further clarification and to discuss it to your unique circumstances, then please do get in touch. We're happy to run through that with you. So we're coming to the end. We've got a few questions left, and this is probably going to be our longest episode yet, so we'll move on. Leon asks, I'm new to property investing. How do I get to learn or find where the best deals are? So we've answered that, Leon, previously. So just do a bit of a rewind if you're not here live this evening, and you'll get the answer. So it's things like networking, approaching builders at the right time, property investment companies like myself, individual sourcing people, speaking with auctions as well. I forgot to mention that one earlier. Make sure you do your research, because you can lose a lot of money in auctions if you get it wrong, but you can also do well. There are plenty of places. Just do your research and, network and speak to the experts, and you'll find them. Last one, Rob.
Yeah, Paul Forshaw. Paul, you've asked my favourite question of the night, and you're about to unlock a massive can of geeky worms. What books should I be reading? Paul asks. Should I get my plug in first? And then we'll move on.
I was going to smoothly go, well, Rob, haven't you got a book?
Funny you should mention that, Rob. I do. It's called Property Investment for Beginners. If you're a beginner in property investment, I highly recommend it. It's a book that I wrote to answer all the questions that I had when I started, and it talks about a lot of the mindset and goal setting stuff that we bang on about all the time. It also talks about all the strategies you can use and many other wonderful things, and it's got loads of terrible jokes as well. If you want to get a hold of that, it's propertygeek.net/beginners. And moving swiftly on, there are many, many other things we can recommend as well. Well, Rob, have you got any specifically property ones? Because all the ones on the list that I've jotted down are actually not about property at all, but about kind of things more broadly.
Just to add to yours, Rob, and you've got the plug there, but I have to say, and I've not told you this, I've spoken to quite a few property podcast listeners this week who've called into the office for different reasons. And a few of them have mentioned they read your book and they rated it really highly. So that's some propping up for you there. It's whatever the kids say.
It's not that.
It's definitely not that, but it's something that rhymes. I don't know. Basically, it was all good. Well done, Rob. There seems to be a lot of positive feedback to your book, the people who've been buying it and reading it. So that's really good. To answer your question, I think Successful Property Letting is a very good book. It's not a whirlwind tour of a book. It's not particularly exciting, but if you want to learn, then it's a fantastic book. So Successful Property Letting, and really Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is loosely related to property, would be the other one. The Rich Dad Poor Dad, the amount of investors that I speak to that started because of that book is unbelievable. If I could get an advert in the back of that book, I'd be a very, very wealthy man.
Away from property, I've got a few things here. We talk about systems all the time. One book about systems is The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. I've struggled with that one. I found that a bit dry, but there's another book called Work the System, which is by Sam Carpenter, which I found much easier to get into. So if you're interested in systemizing your business, that might be a good one for you. Another book, which I think I mentioned on the podcast recently, is The Power of Habit. I think I talked about that in the goal setting episode that went up just recently, because if you can take things that you need to be doing to move you towards your goals and turn them into habits, that's really powerful stuff. And that book has just got so many fascinating examples in it. That's just really, really interesting. Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb is another one. That is a beast of a book.
God, I've not heard you mention that one before. That's about your 10th mention in this podcast.
I've only just finished bloody reading it. It's an absolute beast, but it is fascinating. And I'm writing a blog post at the moment about how to sort of apply some of the lessons from that property investing. And the last one, although I could go on all night, is anything by Jay Abraham. How to get everything you can out of all that you've got, or something. I always mangle that title. But Jay Abraham's got loads of really great general points about the mindset of business in general, and you can take loads of that and relate it straight over to property.
I've read nearly all of those books, and I agree with everything you said, including the E-Myth being a little bit difficult. And I've never heard anybody else say that before. So it's like we were meant to be podcast partners, Rob. It's meant to be.
Clearly.
I would add to that list Delivering Happiness. What a fantastic book that is. I base a lot of my business on that book. Just for a bit of background, it's a company called Zappos in America, a very big company that was bought by Amazon for, I think, $1 billion. Tony Hsieh, who wrote that book, it's just brilliant. It's just how all businesses should be run, and it really pees me off when I don't get good service because I've read this book. That's a definite one to read. One we've mentioned recently, How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's a game changer. Really could change your life, that book, if you've not read it before. And Ultimate Sales Machine, I think I've not got it in front of me. The book, I mean, Rob.
Yeah, that's the one. You're right. Yeah, Ultimate Sales Machine.
Don't be put off by the title. It's not about cheesy sales tactics. It really isn't. This is more for business owners. It's more about making sure you've got the right systems and just loads of clever tactics to make sure you hire the right team and so on. Just a really clever book. It's not particularly about one thing. It's just lots of business principles covered. So a really interesting book there. I could go on and on and on, and we could probably do a 2-hour podcast on books, but we shall not. And that, Rob, was our last question. And I know some people have typed in the questions, but unfortunately we are running way over. So what we will do is we will answer your questions in upcoming episodes. So don't worry, if you've typed in a private message to us with a question, we will answer them in due course in subsequent episodes. But thank you so much for your questions, everybody. I hope everybody learned a little bit there. There was a lot to cover, lots of different angles, but I think it was really good, Rob, because we clearly got to answer some of the questions that people want to know and understand and get answered.
Yeah, definitely. No, I really, really enjoyed going through all those. And yeah, thank you to everyone who's submitted a question either in advance or live and hasn't had an answer yet. I've noted down all the questions that have come in during this recording, and we're going to make sure we get to all of them in the next few weeks. So you're just going to have to keep on listening to the podcast.
Scouts on it.
Yeah. So we couldn't let it go by without doing a resource of the week. We've dropped all the other regular parts of the show, but this one had to stay because it's the thing that we get the most feedback on. I think people say they love the resources. And this one I was getting berated for not using before we started recording. So, Rob, tell me why I should be using it and tell everyone else as well.
I can't believe you don't use this. You're going to use it after today. Okay. It's called unroll.me. That's the URL. So type in to your address bar, unroll.me, and it'll bring it up. Basically, it's for Gmail users, and if you're not using Gmail, you should, because it's by far the best mail application out there for your email. What it does is it takes all your newsletters that you receive every day and rolls them up into one email. So every lunchtime, all those sort of Groupon emails that come through and emails about, I don't know, holidays or books or whatever you get emails about, I don't know. It puts them all into one email that gets delivered to me at lunchtime, and I can quickly scan through them all. So I might get 12 emails, and I can look at them and go, no, I'll read that one and that one. And what it does is it stops me getting distracted throughout the day when emails just trickle in. So you know what it's like. You're in your workflow and an email comes in. Oh, that's mildly interesting, slightly more interesting than the spreadsheet I'm working on. I'll spend 10 minutes on that. So it's a great productivity tool. It's really, really useful. I swear by it. It's made a big, big difference to me. The other thing it does is it allows you to quickly unsubscribe to emails as well. You can go into their interface and you can go, okay, yes, I like this email, No, that's been boring, and unsubscribe from free very quickly. It's a great, great tool. So to get a little bit more productive, get some time back during your day, not get distracted, and save time in general, that is a fantastic app. I use it all the time on a daily basis.
All right. I'll use it. You've won me over. I do need to get better on that. I'm pretty good at unsubscribing manually, but it would be nice to have everything collated for me, I suppose. I also seem to end up on an unholy number of mailing lists for people selling in property investments and stuff like that. And why they think I'd buy a property off them when I've never heard of them before we've had no relationship, I don't know. But I'll be using unroll.me to unsubscribe from some of those.
What's even funny, Rob, is I get them. Well, no, my deals aren't quite that good, so I'll just go to you. My email address is, well, I better not say it out public, but it's at RMP Property. So maybe if they looked at the title when they sort of cheekily signed me up, that I might have not been that interested, but they still try.
God loves a trier. All right. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. We've got through it. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you to everyone for being here live. If you're listening to the regular podcast, thank you for sticking with us all the way through. This is definitely going to be our longest yet. And next week, we're going to be talking about leverage. We've had quite a few questions about mortgages or finance in one sense or the other. So it's clearly something people want to know about. But what is the right level of leverage? Is there such a thing? And what are the things you should be thinking about when you're borrowing money to boost your investment returns? So that's next week's episode. We're back with the comfort of our editor, and we're going to be talking about leverage.
And before you go, just a reminder, especially to the people who've joined us live this evening, to go and leave a recording. So go to the propertypodcast.com, and at the top it says get on the show, and it tells you exactly what to do. But we've had a recording through now, Rob. We've actually had more than one, which is fantastic. So what we'd like to do in a few weeks' time when we've had enough is do a whole episode of your recordings. So we play your question out and then we answer it. Hopefully a lot of people have got value out of today's episode where you've come in with your questions, but we'd like to actually play your voices as you ask the questions. Please get involved. Go to the website, follow the instructions, leave a recording. It's really simple. We'll edit it if you're rubbish, don't worry. And we will play it on the show and answer it for you. So get along and do that. And if you're not on the mailing list, why not? Go onto the website and sign up to that too.
And don't go on Unroll Me and unsubscribe yourself later, because we only send one weekly email and it's going to be all killer, no filler.
Oh, I like it. Right, Rob, that's us for another week. Let's get off the air before we disgrace ourselves. We've not done too bad. So thank you, everybody, for listening. We've really enjoyed it, as always. And it was nowhere near as painful as I thought, Rob. Have a great week, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Property Podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes and join the mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.